So before I start talking about the benefits of behavior-driven product experiences, I think it would be a good idea to paint a picture of the user journey. To do so, let's go over some basic terminology that you're probably familiar with. First is the initial aha moment. This is the moment where a new sign-up realizes the value of your product and that it actually solves a huge pain point for them. This feeling should be so intense that it motivates them to continue with the activation process. So what is the activation process? It is the phase where a user fully engages or activates the initial set of key features in your product. And this is the first step to complete adoption, which is the end goal of the user journey. And it happens once a user becomes so engaged with the product that they reach a stage of complete adoption or activation of all the persona relevant features in your product, or even expand the use cases for it. So this is a visual representation of the user journey. As you can see, it starts with the user activation process, and this is where a user finds the initial value or the aha moment. And ideally, that will push them to the adoption phase, where you want to keep consistently triggering more ahas until a user becomes fully engaged and completely adopts the product. So how can behavior-driven product experiences help with the activation and the adoption phases? But how is that possible to do on a static UI? I mean, your UI doesn't change based on the persona or the stage that the user is currently in the journey. So that's where we introduce the product experience layer. This is basically a layer that sits on top of your product's UI and is dynamic enough to change based on specific scenarios. Many SaaS companies, however, misuse this layer. A good example of misusing this or using this in a bad way are product tours. So you see companies doing this all the time. You sign up for a product and then you get bombarded with untimely general tooltips where you keep clicking next, 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 next. These tours feel forced, out of context, and they do so little to actually help. They are meant to help you navigate your way around, but actually doing very little to drive meaningful actions, which only means you are unlikely to drive any ahas. What I'm going to be showing you today is how to use the product experience layer to make your user onboarding and the adoption process to be all about the user. What is the use case? What drives value for them? How can they be helped, not in a forceful way, but actually when they need it, based on the context, based on the behavior and what they're doing. Using the product experience layer with context in mind is way superior to traditional methods for many reasons. It reacts to the user as opposed to forcing the user. It takes context in mind, which stage in the journey they're in, which features have they activated, what's their use case, and so on. And most importantly, it can be easily manipulated for the right situation and A/B tested to optimize the goal of the experience. Okay, so now we talked about how dynamic behavior-driven product experiences are superior and how can they help us with activation, adoption, and moving users along the journey. But how can we create them in an effective way is the most important question. To do so, we need to establish a solid framework to work with. The framework, in my opinion, consists of two main ideas or tasks. First, we need to understand how activation happens, and then we need to map an ideal user journey. If we can understand what makes users find value in the product, then we are more likely to end up with more activated users. And if we can understand which situations are making users adopt certain features, then we are definitely more likely to end up with more users adopting the product. So first, we need to understand the path to user activation, or as I like to call it, the ideal activation path. As you remember, activation is all about triggering that initial aha and making sure users see the value in your product. Our goal here is to understand how users are finding the initial value in the product. So basically, what are the set of key actions that each persona is taking to find this value? You could easily end up with multiple activation metrics for different personas, or even different ways of finding that value. Things that can help you during this process: monitoring the first run experience using tools such as Full Story or Hotjar, or in my opinion, collecting feedback from your already successful users. What kind of in-app actions have they taken to find value? Then, if we know this, we can push signups of that persona to take similar actions and become successful as well. If you find that the activation in your specific case is linear, then it's definitely an easier task. And it becomes clear then what you need to do to push certain actions during that first run. But it's not always that easy. Okay, so next, let's take a look at the adoption journey. And this is actually the part where I feel like behavior-driven product experiences will be most useful. In the activation process, things are more linear. There's only so much a user can do to find value. But here, the journey to adoption is definitely a non-linear one. Your product can have many features, and not every user will explore them in the same way or even the same pace. So it becomes very important to push features in a subtle context-based method. Okay, so let's say user found that initial aha and is activated, and they are using the initial set of key features of your product. It's perfect, but what comes after that? We need to figure a way to keep them going along the adoption journey. On a most important level, we need to make sure that we are tracking all sets of different key events in the app. This will help us do correlation analysis, funnel analysis, and really understand under which situations are these features being used and under which conditions or order they are being activated. This will help us establish both successful patterns and also understand where the dropouts are happening, under which context a user is likely to adopt a feature, and why are they failing to see values in other feature. So simply, this is your goal: to build dynamic product experiences that activates users and align them to the map journey. So to recap the main points here, let's take a look at the key takeaways that will help you improve both your activation and adoption. Let's start with the user activation. The first run experience is pivotal and can be often the difference between activation and churn. So focus on that. Focus on driving meaningful actions based on user persona, use cases, and if possible, give them a choice on how to begin. There's multiple examples of companies such as Airtable that would collect the user persona or the use case during the sign-up flow and then adjust the whole following first run experience based on that. The main idea is to never overwhelm them with all features of your product. They are not looking to learn about all of what your product has to offer, but instead they want to see the initial value and a way to motivate them to continue exploring your product. Finally, you should save all your tips and hints to where actually showing them would make sense. Context, context, context. As for the adoption process, you do want to track major events on the app. You do want to run some analysis and understand the ideal user journey. Even if it's not linear, chances are that key events on your app are highly correlated. So make sure to set up your product experiences to react to major events and try to keep pushing users along the journey. This is important. Users are more likely to adopt features after certain key events, and running a simple funnel analysis will probably convince you of that. And you have to understand, complete adoption of a certain product will take time. No account or user will go and completely adopt your software from day one. And this is exactly why I think product tours actually fail, because you're trying to show all features that you have at once without being focused on value. Be patient and stage the right product experience to the right situation or context. I would end this by giving kind of a generic advice. Users have a limited attention span during a run. Make sure you keep them focused on what's important and never overwhelm them. Do this by reacting to them. React to the context, the stage of the journey they're currently in. What key events are they actually triggering on that run? And always avoid forcing them or being too general.